Today's episode of Quarantine Creatives is brought to you by soak pools. If you're new to the show and you haven't heard me talk about soak pools before, listen up. Soak pools are revolutionary space-saving pools that combine the best of a pool and a hot tub, install in just days, and provide year-round enjoyment. It's summertime. I know we're all thinking about how we can get more use out of our backyards, but the truth is a soak pool you can use year-round, even up here in New England when it gets cold and snowy, because you have the option of heating it and heating it hot. So it can be like a hot tub. It can be like a really big hot tub, or it can just be a nice sized pool. They're great pools just to go cool off after a long day. Just relax, just float, swim, whatever you want to do. They're beautiful. They're awesome. Go check them out. Soak pools are made in New Hampshire. They install throughout New England and can even ship anywhere in the country to be installed by your local pool company. For more information, visit www.soakpools.com. That's Soak Pools, SOAKEPOOLS.com. Soak Pools, small pools, big benefits. Welcome to Quarantine Creatives. I'm Heath Racela. You tuned in for a good one today. I'm glad you're here. I think you're going to be glad you're here. Talking to Nick Offerman today, the one, the only Nick Offerman. Just a little bit. He's going to be here. We're going to be chatting. It's going to be a good time. If you're new to this show, welcome. If you've been here for a while, thanks for coming back. Let me just tell you quickly sort of who I am and what the deal is with this show. So I'm a TV producer and director. I work in the Boston area, and I actually got laid off from my longtime producing gig back in March. Right as coronavirus was kind of starting and everything was shutting down. So I've been looking for a creative outlet, and I've been looking for a way to sort of make sense of what's happening in the entertainment and media space as coronavirus has just completely changed the face of my profession. And so if you listen back to some of the other shows, I've been trying to talk to people from sort of all sides of the entertainment and media industry to figure out just where are we, what's coming, what's your comfort level, what are you doing to keep sane, all of that. So if you enjoyed today's show, I'd encourage you to listen back to some of the other ones I've done just to hear some other perspectives on where we are as an industry. But today, it's all about Nick Offerman, and I can't begin to tell you how excited I am for this. Nick and I have actually met a couple of times in the past. The producing gig that I got laid off from, that I was at actually for 15 years, was with This Old House, the PBS show. I used to work on Ask This Old House, and Nick, it turns out, was a fan of both shows. And we had approached him at one point, just sort of heard he was a woodworker and wanted to see if he wanted to try to collaborate on some stuff. And so he first came to our studio in the Boston area. It's probably 2015, maybe 2016, somewhere in there. I mean, it's been 4 or 5 years now. But he was doing a play in Boston and came by and hung out and played a little silly game with our cast. And then we went out to his wood shop and shot a really long tour that if you go on YouTube, it's up on there. Nick Offerman, This Old House, you'll see his wood shop tour, and it's really incredible and really fun. And we actually did that tour as part of the press for his book Good Clean Fun, which has been out a couple of years, but it is a really, really good book. If you're somebody that you're just thinking about getting involved in woodworking, it's the book that will push you over the edge. It did that for me, I know. When I read that book, it was like, oh, woodworking doesn't have to be this fancy, fussy thing with, down to the 32nd of an inch or 64th of an inch. It's like anything you want to do with wood is called woodworking, and go do it and go have fun. So that book was a great influence. It was fun to help Nick with that. Nick's one of those guys that every time I meet him, I assume he's met, 5,000 people between the last time that he and I met. And so I always reintroduce myself, just like, hey, Nick, I'm Heath. Good to see you again. And he always gives me a big hug. And he says, you don't have to say that, Heath. I know who you are. That was my Nick Offerman. Wasn't great, but which, I'm always kind of surprised and flattered by. But I don't know. I guess he and I connected on some level because when I started this show, I pitched his team and said, "Hey, I'm doing this new thing. Do you think Nick would ever want to be a guest?" And they wrote me back and said, "Yeah, let's do it this time." And I was kind of floored. I didn't expect it, but yeah, we had a really great talk. It's Nick's a deep guy. He's super smart. He's super funny, and he can talk to you just about anything. I mean, you'll see where this conversation goes. And the truth is, there's like 100 things I wanted to talk to him about, and we didn't even get time to get that deep into it because the conversation just went in a whole different direction. We started talking about, well, you'll hear it. You'll hear where we go. But yeah, I wanted to talk to him about his new podcast that he and his wife Megan Mullally do. It's called In Bed with Nick and Megan, and the show started last year. They were doing it literally in their bedroom. They would have a guest come over and sit in their bed with them, and they would interview them. And now, because of coronavirus, that whole workflow's changed. I want to talk to him about that. Didn't get a chance to. I wanted to talk to him about Making It, the show that he does with Amy Poehler, where it's like a crafting competition show on NBC. And because of coronavirus, they've been making little web videos about how to make things. Nick and Amy across Zoom and putting that up on Instagram. Wanted to talk about that. Ran out of time for that. Nick was, of course, in Parks and Recreation for many years on NBC. They did a special one-time episode to help raise money for some food pantries around the country and reunited the cast virtually. It was really fun. Go check that out. He's also in the show Devs on Hulu. You can go check that out right now. And he's got the podcast. You can listen to that. You can do a lot. You know him. You've seen him. He also tours as a comedian. Have I mentioned that? He tours as a comedian, and he's got a lot of his comedy specials are up streaming for free right now. So go check those out too. All right. I could literally introduce Nick all day because his resume is so long. He's just done so much. And I could have talked to him for probably 4 hours and still had stuff to ask him about. So yeah, here's a little conversation with the one and only Nick Offerman. Hey, Nick.
Hello, Heath. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm in a house that's not on fire, so I'm counting my lucky stars.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that just like this whole time, like starting with the coronavirus stuff and now on to all the protesting and stuff. Like from my house, stuff looks normal, and it's really easy to just kind of get sucked into my own life and not realize the bigger picture that's going on out there. But it's scary times. I don't know. How are you feeling?
Sure, yeah, it is surreal. If one didn't pay attention to the news, you wouldn't even know that there was a pandemic, or a couple miles away, there's rioting and what have you. But this was sort of predicted when Trump got elected. The sense was, well, the infirmities in this country are going to now come to the surface.
Yeah.
The disgusting, enormous whitehead is going to form on the epidermis of the United States. And it's, we will see what needs purging. So in the long run, I'm cautiously hopeful that this will bring about some moral advancement. But by and large, it's a fraught time. It's a crazy time to be doing what we do. And for me personally, I'm just having a really strange time because there's not going to be any acting jobs in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And so that part of it, I'm very grateful for the influences, especially the writers that I adhere to. They bring me a lot of solace and allow me to focus on things like cooking with my wife and, doing things at my wood shop, but not on a grand scale, just on a domestic scale.
Has that been sort of how your time's been taken up? Just just reading and thinking and things like that, or what have you been doing to sort of keep sane during this time?
Reading and thinking. I mean, when the quarantine began, my wife and I just started doing a lot of jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah.
And listening to audiobooks. That's one of our favorite things to do at any time. And I run 4 miles a day, and I find that really helps sort of keep the metabolism of my energy flowing, and whatever anxiety I'm feeling works itself out quite a bit when I run. And we immediately shut the shop down. There's 5 employees right now, and so we sent them all home. And so at first we just sort of stayed home and hunkered down and said, okay, let's get the lay of the land. And then after a few weeks, I began to venture over to the shop. I built some set of shelves for my garage, a couple small projects for friends, but mainly I'm very lucky that I'm not just an actor and a woodworker, but I'm also a writer. And so not only have I been reading a great deal, but I have 2 new projects with my publisher that I'm working on. So in the long run, I'm very grateful I can earn some income without needing to leave the house.
Yeah. It's definitely been a strange time. And that's part of why I wanted to start this podcast, I think, too, was just, I got laid off in March at the beginning of all this. And for, 2 months now, 3 months, it's been just trying, for me personally, like thinking about it from like, how do I want to jump back into production, and, what does my next move look like? But as I started talking to friends in the industry, sort of realizing that everybody's in this boat right now, that this isn't, normally, like if I had lost my job a year ago, it would be like, okay, that sucks. Let me call some other production houses and see what's happening in town, or, take some freelance gigs or whatever. It takes some time to figure it out, but know that there could be a source of income. There could be a source of, creative outlet. And yeah, just in talking to everybody, realizing, oh shit, we're all in this boat. Like nobody is doing anything right now. And really just kind of wanting to explore that with other people. I wanted to talk just about some of the projects that you've had going. I know, there was that Parks and Rec special that was really great. And just, I know you talked a lot about that on the Good Place podcast, and people should listen to that and kind of hear the whole story, but sort of the Cliff Notes version. How did that all come about and work, I guess?
Well, it came about, Mike Schur, the main creator and writer of Parks and Rec, admirably, he also is the creator of The Good Place. He, in the case of both of those shows, he ended the series on his own terms. So he's this rare bird in Hollywood who places the integrity of his writing and his storytelling above his bank account.
Yeah.
Usually, if you're lucky enough to get a TV show going, then you milk that son of a bitch for all it's worth until it keels over after season 11. And so, among the many ways I count myself lucky in knowing Mike is the fact that he deals with such integrity, and so I have known ever since this sort of new rash of rebooting shows has struck, that we would very likely never do anything like that with Parks and Recreation. That said, when this whole thing sort of went down, when the pandemic struck, Mike was talking to some other big shots in town about just overview and like what's going to happen. We're going to run out of material to broadcast. And Mike said, I have one idea. Maybe we could come up with this Parks and Rec reunion. It wouldn't really be, an actual episode of the show, as it were. It would sort of exist outside of the 125 episodes we did. But it might be a nice way to raise some money for food charities and food banks. And so, of course, anything Mike ever asks of us, an army of people springs to his service and says, yes, by God. I mean, I've told him I could be in Australia and he could call me to help him move across town tomorrow, and I would be there with an extra pickup truck. He's just one of those
Yeah.
guys who will all come running when he needs us. So it was, and then there's another guy named Morgan Sackett, who's the main producer of Parks and Rec and The Good Place, and another up and coming program called Veep. He's just incredible. He's this quiet, intelligent, incredibly competent Iowan who he's the one who, Mike sort of and the writers, they dream up the world and the scenarios, and then Morgan is in charge of looking at the pocketbook and saying, okay, I can make that happen.
Yeah.
I can build you a harvest festival or a unity concert or what have you. And so Morgan was the mastermind. He came up with the way to, like, each cast member had a kit, like a tub full of equipment dropped off that had been through a sanitizing cleaning. So everybody got like an iPhone on a tripod with a little lighting unit. And it was really fun and brilliant. So for me, and spoiler alert, Tammy 2 is in my scenes because I'm married to the powerful actress who plays Tammy 2.
Of course.
So
Megan Mullally.
Yeah. So we went to my wood shop and, tried to create something that could cast for one of Ron's cabins. And then you get on the laptop with Morgan and Dean Holland, one of our main directors, and our editor. So they're basically zooming in to the scene. They can see what's going down. I would literally line up the shot on the iPhone, and then I would spin the laptop around so that they could see the shot. It was really fun. It had a real sort of Bad News Bears, let's get the ramshackle gang back together for one last pageant, and it came off great. The donations are still open, I think, through, I want to say, June 21st. But last time I heard, we were up over like 4.3 million or something like that we had raised. So it was incredibly effective. It really, was sort of a global wave of good-hearted friendliness. It was like a hug to our audience. I'm very grateful, to be part of that crew. Mike's just that kind of guy that it would occur to him to take perhaps his most precious property, Parks and Recreation, and say, okay, I'm going to make a gift of this to the people.
It touched me in ways that I didn't expect. When I first heard about it, I was a little cynical, just like, oh, okay, another revival and it's a one-off, and, what's this going to be? And, by the end of it, when you're all singing 5,000 Candles in the Wind, like I was tearing up and just like, oh my God, like I didn't know how much I don't know. I love those characters in that world, and just to be back in it for a half hour was nice. Like, what do you think it is about those characters that resonates so much with people?
Well, I mean, it kind of dovetails neatly with what you're talking about. Like the inception of the characters and the storylines that the writers come up with go hand in hand with the idea that you can do a show, like you said, you're a perfectly nice guy who I know through like good-hearted PBS programming.
Yeah.
And even, Heath hears about this show and is like, oh, great. And, another money grab, or, just immediately you jump to consumerist cynicism of
or just, is it going to be good? Or, it ended so nicely. Like, do we really need to reboot this? Yeah.
Right. What's the catch here?
Right.
And then to see it and say, and then, so for me, that's the sort of root answer to your question is, the show continues to remind us. I always say of Mike, I'm very grateful to him in a life lesson sort of way, because he's taught me that we can still be very funny while saying I love you to one another.
Yeah.
Those two things don't need to be separated. And that's what I feel like happens with the show. People tune in because they know it's funny and they like the funny characters and stories, but then it sneaks up on the audience and says, oh yeah, it's also encouraging us to be nice. It's reminding us, especially in this time, reach out to one another, take care of each other, also allow ourselves to take care of ourselves. Give yourself a break if you're a Leslie Knope type. And beyond that, I got asked that a lot over the years. Why do you think why do you think Ron Swanson resonates with people so strongly? And I came up with the line, there's no point in asking the clown from behind the makeup why the children are crying. But as near as I can discern, I think there's a set of values in Parks and Recreation that we all miss.
Yeah.
We all sort of dumbly have been led along by the Industrial Revolution, a life of luxury and laziness without paying attention to what it's doing to our planet and to all facets of nature, the flora and the fauna and ourselves. And now, we've been enjoying this sort of resplendent meal for decades, and the waiter has just arrived with the bill.
Yeah.
In the form of climate change and our absolute bed shitting in response to this pandemic. We allowed the deeply shameful administration to occupy the White House that's in there now. I mean, we did that. We brought that about, and now we're paying the price. I mean, we've been warned for at least 20 years. Experts in the government have been saying, man, if a pandemic hits,
yeah,
we either need to get ready, etc. And of course, our president famously threw away the instructions
and fired the team and the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, literally we put a guy in charge who threw away the fire extinguisher as fire season was upon us.
Yeah.
And so the thing I love about the show is that I think it has a set of values that we all somehow remember in a generational way and say, oh, I need this. I need Ron Swanson telling me what to eat, what or not, I need the 6 rules to live by.
Yeah.
Because I think we're all drowning in choice. We're all drowning in information. And when you have a surplus of information, too many things to look at, too many bright colors, that creates a deficit of attention. You then are unable to focus on any one thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I don't know. I'm thinking too, just a conversation I had about the show maybe a year or two ago. We were shooting in a house in Birmingham, Alabama, lovely young couple. And in their kitchen, they had a poster of, you remember that bit Aziz did as Tom, where, I call apps Zaz, or there was a whole thing of, chicky, chicky, bang, bang, whatever, all his funny words for different foods. And they had that kind of in poster form. I was like, oh, you're a Parks and Rec fan. That's cool. And she said, yeah, we're rewatching it right now. And this was 2017, 2018. And I hadn't seen it since probably prior to the election. It was, 2014, 2015, somewhere in there was the last time I had seen it. And I said, does that show hold up though? Like I remember watching it during this time when it felt like, female leaders were on the ascent, and, it was easy to see some of Leslie in Hillary Clinton and to sort of see that better world that Leslie was leading people towards. And then just to feel like we took a giant step backwards when Trump got elected. And I was like, does the show hold up now in that context? She said, no, it's actually better than ever. Like, it's given me a lot of hope in these times. And yeah, it was nice to hear that. I haven't gone back and watched it yet, but maybe I will at some point.
It is good to hear. The one funny thing about the reunion show was over the next few days, I have long since given up looking at seeking out reviews, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, for kind of since the beginning of Parks and Rec, which was 2009, there's been just such a preponderance of information. And Mike, I've heard Mike speak more eloquently about it, but basically since the advent of social media, certainly, but even even before then, kind of since the advent of the chat room or the ability to leave comments
Yeah.
on any website, and the advent of websites that need to fill their content. For a lot of my life, if you had a TV show, they would just review the first episode of the season and the finale.
Yeah.
But it's a relatively new modern development where people need to fill content, and so they began reviewing every episode of every show.
And you're talking just about traditional media at this, like an LA Times or Hollywood Reporter or something, not even just like, Jimmy's blog or something. Like,
right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could rattle off, I don't know, once I have something coming out and they send me a list, they say, here's the outlets we're pitching to see if they'll interview you, and are these okay with you? And it'll be like 50 outlets, and they're all, name brand, Variety and BuzzFeed and whatever. So that's just the name brand stuff. Then beyond that, the amount of like blogs and websites is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
You kind of like get things by osmosis, or if there's something anomalous, like something really bad or really good, someone will then tell you about it. So I sort of use social media by osmosis. I glance at it. I try to contribute to it because it's part of my business. Like having a good amount of following translates into clout. Like
it's book sales, it's comedy club sales, right?
Yeah, which I'm not crazy about, because it also translates into having to be my own salesman.
Yeah.
And I don't like that part of it at all. And that's what keeps me from fully engaging. But I've developed a technique where I'll sort of breeze through, usually once or twice a day. And that allows me to not feel obligated to consume everything coming my way, because that would be kind of a full-time job.
Yeah.
And so after the reunion special aired, breezing through social media, I saw it 3 instances where people couldn't resist. They felt the need to say, and one was a very prominent television critic, said, okay, it's not the funniest episode ever, was like the opening of his review of the show.
Yeah.
And there was a few other of those just from like random people on social media where they're like, yeah, it wasn't great. And I just shook my head and laughed and said, what the fuck do you think it was? Like, did you think it was an attempt? Are you so thick that you thought it was merely trying to come out of retirement? Like it was like a Tiger Woods.
Yeah. It was shot on iPhones, like as a fundraiser.
It was like, hey guys, clearly here's what the thing is. And in the context, it was astonishing. Like it should win an Oscar for what it was.
Yeah.
It always makes me laugh. Like I'm always being reminded that no matter how magnanimous your gesture, or no matter how good your intentions, you still are barreling down the road to hell, apparently.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, just sort of about Ron Swanson, and there was a parallel that I was thinking about relative to Donald Trump and all, and just sort of really trying to think about like, how did we get in this mess? And realizing to me that the origin of a lot of this is The Apprentice, and sort of like, I remember when that show was on, I had, family members and stuff that were just like, you got to watch this. It's so cool. Like he's just this tough businessman and he fires everybody. And like, I never watched the show, but even just in the previews and stuff, I'm like, well, it's all stagecraft. Like it's a boardroom set, and they're lighting him a certain way, and they're giving him this dialogue, but it's all a construct. And yeah, there are pieces of it that have some truth, but it's not a reality show at all. It's, it's this character that Mark Burnett dreamed up, not that, and that Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, he was projecting that, I guess, his whole adult life, right? That he's the casino mogul and he's the airline mogul and whatever, but all those businesses kept failing. And somehow just putting him on prime time and and lighting him a certain way and giving him the right lines, people love that character. And I think in a lot of ways, they think that's who's in the White House now. And like, I just want, like, you played such a distinct character with Ron Swanson. And I remember, I saw your comedy show when you were coming through Boston in October, and you have a song that you close with that's like, I'm not Ron Swanson. And a lot of the thesis of the show is sort of, here's my stance on women's rights and LGBT rights. And, like, I'm not that guy, is sort of the subtext of all that. Like, just, I don't know. You could have easily gone the other way, I guess, and just leaned into that and been like, yeah, I'm the hyper masculine guy that just, I go out in the yard and grab a squirrel and eat it raw every morning or, whatever. Like, I don't know. Do you see that parallel, I guess, of sort of how the public can form an image of a character in their head?
Yeah, for sure. And the stories, the sort of examples I'm aware of, like I don't know. I mean, speaking of our president, I wouldn't be at all surprised to learn that he was very mentally ill.
Of course.
Like he doesn't, he's an incredible anomalous beast who obviously has these talents that I'm guessing he's not even fully aware of.
Yeah.
He's sort of an unstoppable, voracious baby who's somehow keeps being empowered. And so in the case of somebody like him, I don't know, I'm thinking of like for some reason the amazing Scorsese film King of Comedy is springing to mind. And it's, in my opinion, kind of easily Robert De Niro's best work. He plays this incredible character named Rupert Pupkin, who is an aspiring stand-up, and he's kind of stalking Jerry Lewis. I forget.
I don't think I've seen it, actually.
Oh man, it's so amazing. It's really, really funny and deeply chilling.
Yeah.
Jerry Lewis is also amazing in it. I'm blanking on the character he plays, but he plays sort of I mean, if you saw the recent film Joker, it basically is a deep ripoff of
Gotcha.
King of Comedy.
Okay.
It's this. I wasn't interested in seeing Joker, but from what I read about it, it's the same paradigm. Desperate, lonely incel, sort of stalking the Johnny Carson character, which coincidentally is played by De Niro in Joker. Yeah. Anyway, the what I'm driving at is in the case of those two characters in this film, who are desperate to achieve a certain image, and they see success as being perceived as a certain character or in a certain way, or in other words, maybe to put it more simply, is putting fame above integrity. It's putting the cover at a much higher importance than the book, as it were.
Yeah.
And so whether he's mentally ill or not, I'm pretty certain that our current president has got to be the most miserable person living. What he wants so desperately, he can never have.
Yeah.
And the harder he tries to gain the approval of decent people of taste and class and morality, the harder he tries to gain that approval, the more he's despised. And in a lesser way, I feel like if you come to be known as like a television character, say, or as for having a certain voice, you're right. One choice is to lean into that and say, ooh, I can ride this gravy train, for a really long time. But I pretty quickly just recognized in my gut that would be really disappointing, that it would bring, that it would not bring me fulfillment, and it would become, if I were my own version of being perceived as the boss of The Apprentice, as it were, would just become an albatross. I would hate that character.
Yeah.
And I think it's played out. I think from the time The Apprentice happened through till now, it's clear to anybody with eyes to see that that people are making money off of that particular brand of puppet, but nobody's getting happy. It's not bringing anybody anything good. It's just much like American consumerism. It's making a few people a lot of money, and that's about all you can say for it.
Yeah. I want to just think too about sort of, you were talking about sort of a reset that may come at the end of all this. And it feels like just seeing so many people out on the streets marching against racial inequality, against police brutality, seeing sort of the reaction to, the lack of cars on the road and the lack of pollution, that my hope anyways is that there may be a wake-up call and a chance to sort of reset some of the assumptions that we've made over the last however many years of what it means to live in this country, and what the good life looks like, what the American dream looks like. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like we may get there, that this may be a chance to reset some of that stuff and start fresh?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's not that easy as hitting a reset button. So it's not something that is going to happen, I think, quickly. But I do think that we are experiencing a reawakening of, I mean, it really couldn't be more simple. It's just our relationship to the planet, our relationship to the soil.
Yeah.
And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Like I grew up in this wonderful family. Both my mom and dad come from farms near each other in this central Illinois little town. And my mom's family are still farming. So, and everybody in the family are like, it's almost a joke. It's like a Norman Rockwell family. To a man or woman, it's school teacher, nurse, librarian, paramedic,
wow,
craft brewer, and then a bunch of farmers.
Yeah.
But like and then one jackass went off to become an actor. But so, I mean, I grew up in this family with really great values, really great work ethic, and that has served me so well. And that's even though now I live in Los Angeles and I've always existed, I've lived only in Chicago and New York and LA because I've had to be where the audience is, because
Sure.
a lot of my work has been in the live theater. Even so, the older I get, the more I feel a kinship with my family, and the simple appreciation of things like family and friendships and neighbors and gardening and cooking and handcrafting. And it's living a self-sustained life in a frugal way, and experiencing the pleasures that can bring. Developing what would become my career over the years of adulthood, I never cognizantly said, "Oh, I love woodworking. I'm going to become a woodworker, and I want to become known for that." That you could have knocked me over with a feather if you had told me that I would one day co-host a crafting TV show.
Yeah.
That said, even though I sort of backed into it, I'm so grateful, because the older I get, the more I become aware that I very rarely need to buy anything. And that's the thing where I say I'm as guilty as anybody. Like through my teens and 20s, for sure, I'd say I started waking up maybe in my early 30s, 20 years ago. And but through my teens and 20s, I was as good of an American consumer as anybody. Like I was susceptible to advertising, and I would much rather eat, the hot and laboratory tested tastiness of fast food rather than some, home cooked beef stew that just sounds bland because of the way commercials have made it sound bland. But then you actually sit down at a farmer's table, or just a proper homemaker's table for a meal of beef stew, and you are reminded, oh my God, I'm back in the nest. I'm back in the cradle of life. These people are creating life around them, and that takes time, and that has a value that is so much more rewarding than any TV show,
Yeah.
than any video game, than any of all this stuff. So it's had a tough effect on my choices as well. Like, the more I feel this way, the less amount of scripts come across my table that I feel like I want to be involved in. So, but to get back on track, I feel like our world is, because of climate change and sort of generational thought revolution, Generation Z, let's see, we're X, then the millennials, then Gen Z. Both millennials and Gen Z, are unencumbered with a lot of our baggage, the way generations work. And so they simply say, what's the matter with you people? Of course, people of all races are equal. And of course, all genders are, equally legitimate and deserve equal rights. And of course, we need to pay attention to the needs of our planet. Like, we're destroying it, our safe haven, hand over fist. So I think we're waking up to that notion that if everybody begins to consume less and pay more attention to our carbon footprint in a nutshell, it will affect the way we live, and we will come to understand that it can be just as enjoyable as it can be more enjoyable than the most resplendent consumerist lifestyle. But more importantly than how we feel personally is coming to understand that, I think, will guide our voting, because that the Industrial Revolution, from then till now, and Wendell Berry writes so beautifully about this. Like, we've been sold this bill of goods that we don't deserve to do. We deserve to not have to engage in hard work. Once factories were able to make vacuum cleaners and other items of luxury, well, then you've got these hordes of housewives who are hardworking and frugal. And these companies say, well, how are we going to sell these vacuum cleaners to these smart housewives? And advertising is born, where they say, is your back hurting? Are your knees sore? You deserve to sit down and put your feet up. Get our luxury, time-saving gadgets, and eventually we began to buy those things and say, oh, great. And so just run that out to its natural extension. So say you buy every time-saving, labor-saving device. So you have a robot house, and everything is done for you. Okay. So you wake up in the morning, you eat the breakfast that appears because the robots made it. Now what? Now you have the day in front of you, but you don't have to do anything because the Roomba is cleaning your house. Everything's being taken care of. And so then you say, well, gosh, what should I do? Well, you turn on your channels and they say, well, you should go to the mall and buy more of our stuff, or you should play our video games, or, tune into our channels. And if you think about it, none of that stuff has any reward. There's nothing productive about it. And so for me, that's just what I try to pay more and more attention to is, it's easy. I'm a very good human being. Like, I respond well to shiny objects. So if somebody says, hey, look at these handsome new work boots with a redesigned steel toe, I'll strain something, snapping my head over to look at those. But if I step back and think about it, I think, hang on a second, I'm standing here in a pair of perfectly good work boots. There's no need to give into this desire that's been trained into me.
Yeah.
So that's my hope, is that we can train ourselves back out of this consumerism, because we understand that our relationship with our food and understanding where it comes from and how we treat the soil and the elements, the air and the water, how that it's all part of the cycle. And we're doing a very bad job the last 70 or 80 years.
Yeah. It's so rewarding too. Just like, I discovered last year, we joined a CSA, a really good CSA near us. And like coming into the fall, August, September, the harvest was just insanely good. And you'd come home every week with just so much produce that you'd have to figure out, like, what do I do with this? And for, I don't know, 6 weeks in the late summer, early fall, my Saturday and Sunday was spent, either processing stuff for the next week, let me make some meals that we can eat throughout the week, or discovering canning, which I had never done before, but, making my own tomato sauces and pickles and hot pepper jelly. And it's actually been really great, because during this quarantine now, I still have some of that in the basement, and you go down there in, March, April, when it's here in Boston, it's cold and snowy, and, you don't want to go outside, and you just have this amazing fresh, tomato sauce that tastes like last August or September. And yeah, there's a satisfaction in that. And I feel like for me, I always felt the need to put a label on something that, like, if I'm going to be a woodworker, I have to do the kinds of stuff like you and your team are doing with, beautiful, live edge slabs and stuff. And it's like, no, I can start simple with some basic pine and pocket screws and make something functional for my house and for my family. And it's really satisfying just to start there and work your way up to something. But for me, it was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to have the tools. I want to, am I going to label myself that way? And it took a long time to kind of get over that and say, just do it, just try, just get in there and have fun with it,
Oh, absolutely. My woodworking book, Good, Clean, Fun, that's a big part of my introduction. It is encouraging people to say, look, there's nothing fancy about it. If you want to build a doghouse or fix a step on your back porch, like, it's all working with wood. I've been making stuff out of wood with tools for over 30 years, and I don't expect to end up with any of my pieces in a museum, but I also don't aspire to that. I make things because they serve people. They do good in the world. It's taking wood that would otherwise be destroyed one way or another and giving it another life.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get lucky and it turns out to be a really pretty dining table. But as you said, sometimes it's a bread box. Sometimes its beauty is in its functionality.
Yeah. A simple bookshelf or something.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is the mentality behind that. And the other things you were talking about, either growing your own vegetables or signing up with a CSA is one of the smartest things we can do, because it drives back towards what I'm talking about. It brings the cycles of agriculture into your home. I think it's so healthy to only have the harvest, for example, for 6 to 8 weeks. We weren't meant to be able to have blueberries every morning for breakfast.
Yeah.
And so understanding when you can have what items, eating seasonally is an important part of living in harmony with the planet. But it makes you aware of who's growing that stuff. Where is the farm that's supplying you with this box of produce, and how are they doing? And what is our government doing to take care of them? Because the people who grow our food provide literally our first line of security. Like, that's something we're learning, I think, in this pandemic, is when suddenly the world has to stay home, when suddenly we can't be shipping potatoes across oceans. Suddenly we say, oh crap, who has a cellar full of food or not. Mostly not. Mostly we're not prepared to feed our population. And even the way we do feed our population with the monocultures, the danger of like growing vast fields of only one species of corn or soybean, or the dangers of overproducing these industrially produced beef cattle or pigs or chickens has become obvious.
Yeah.
A virus gets into the meat packing plant. I mean, just the term meat packing plant.
Yeah.
Do you want the food you feed your children to come through a place called a meat packing plant,
Right.
where in the middle of a pandemic, the working conditions are so filthy and uncomfortable that the government told them to keep going, to keep working in the meatpacking plant. And they said, well, we can't socially distance and we can't wear masks because we literally would die if we had to wear a mask and work in these conditions.
Yeah.
So instead, everybody gets the disease. It's an incredibly dangerous national security issue.
Yeah. And realizing that when you separate out those component parts, you miss the bigger picture that, like, a family farm 100 years ago, you're raising cattle or pork or whatever, and you're taking that manure and feeding the crops. And then, just that cycle of it versus, like you say, like if you're growing this monoculture of corn, you've got to fertilize it somehow. So you bring in synthetic nitrogen. And if you've got these animal farms, you got to do something with all the shit. So it just ends up in a cesspool. Like realizing that if you combine those two elements, like we did for, thousands of years, it just kind of makes sense.
Well, it does. I mean, that's how our species survived for millennia is by using common sense and looking at our locality and saying, okay, how can we glean our food from this landscape, from these animals, from these plants, in a way that will allow generation upon generation to keep eating. And instead, we're using the rapacious technique of the forestry industry, where we just cut all the trees down.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we could go on like this for a long time, but I feel like we should wrap it up and just, I don't know. Do you have words of hope for all of us at the end of this? Do we get out on the other side with everything that's happening right now?
I mean, I think so. I see no cause for pessimism just because that's my nature. Things are bleak right now. I mean, we're having this conversation, I think 8 or 9 days into the protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And the story is like 90% protests, 10% rioting and looting.
Yeah.
And that's a guess on my part, but I mean, again, it's fascinating. The story is that this percentage of our population, which I'll represent I'll call them Black Lives Matter, are simply making their voices heard until our government finally listens to them, and our dipshit government continues to fail to do so. I mean, the issue here is 4 police officers were involved in the murder of this guy. One of them knelt on his neck for 9 minutes or whatever and killed him. 3 of them were complicit. 3 of them helped him and stood there and watched him. Any other setting, they're all in jail.
Right.
Like they're all unquestionably charged. And the problem here is that one of them has been arrested. The other 3 have not. And that's all it would take. Like literally, there are massive protests all over the world against this issue, against the way our government is shitting the bed in their protection of the police and in their discrimination against these Black citizens. And all it would take is literally arresting 3 police officers who clearly deserve to be arrested.
Yeah.
So that's the context in which we're having this conversation. Meanwhile, we're in like the 3rd month of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I mean, ultimately, we are pretty tough cockroaches, we human beings. So there's going to be pain and suffering before there's going to be more pain and suffering before we're out of these particular woods. But I am hoping that this sort of forced time out, this sit down that we're all being made to engage in, will do some good by making us refocus our attentions on how joyful it can be to spend time with our kids, with our hands, making things, with the simple things, paying attention to our food and where it comes from, and how that really is at the heart of all world issues. I mean, what we do with our natural resources, most of which means food. We need food much more than we need power.
Yeah.
And by power, I mean oil and coal and electricity. We don't need those things to survive. We survived a long time without those things. They just became a really great way for a few people to make a shitload of money. And so hopefully this hardship that the world is going through will allow us to see where we should refocus our priorities when we get to the ballot box. Because for me, it's all about the farmers. It's until the government is taking care of our small farmers, not these big industrial giants, Monsanto and Cargill and so forth. I mean, they're as guilty. They're some of the biggest monopolizing evil players happening in the world today. We need our government to protect our small farmers who are stewards of the land. We need to keep our land healthy, and then maybe we can be healthy.
Yeah. November feels like a long way away right now, though. It really does. But you can't give up hope.
Nope. Let's stay in touch. Look around you for who needs something, and we'll do our best to come out the other end still on our feet.
All right, there we go. Nick Offerman, the one, the only. It's funny that could have been an interview with Michael Pollan, right? Like the last third of that was nothing to do with entertainment, but I was engaged with it. He was engaged with it. We just kept going. It was great. I loved it. Go check out Devs, streaming now on Hulu. Check out the Parks and Recreation special if you haven't seen it yet. Go listen to In Bed with Nick and Megan, wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's phenomenal. It's so much fun, super intimate, and funny. I love it. All right, before we go, I want to ask you one favor. If you're new to this show, if this is the first episode you've ever listened to, go back and listen to some of the others. I think you'll enjoy them. If you like today's conversation, the names for the most part are not as recognizable as Nick Offerman, but it's people from across the entertainment and media space that all have really interesting insights into where we're headed as a business and, as a planet. So go listen to some of the other shows if you're new. If you've heard some of those other shows, can I ask you one favor? Can you tell one other person who you think might enjoy this show? Shoot them a quick text, shoot them a quick email, tell them, hey, I think you'd like this podcast. Because, I want people to hear it. And what's better than word of mouth? Isn't that how you find stuff that you like? A friend says, hey, I think you'd like this show. I think you'd like this movie. Tell them about the podcast. I'm at Heath Racela on Twitter and Instagram. Shoot me a line. Let me know what you like, don't like, who you want to see next. Subscribe, rate, review. New show coming on Thursday. It's going to be a good one. I'll talk to you then. Stay safe.